Low, cinematic tone, the sound of wind over an empty prairie, a faint bell tolling in the distance. They say the morning after October 12th, 1899, the air in Selkirk, Montana, didn't move. The frost that covered the windows of the Thornfield mansion seemed too perfect, too still, as if time itself refused to touch that house. Inside, 7 neatly made beds awaited 7 young women who would never sleep in them again. The 7 sisters of Selkirk vanished without a trace. No footprints in the dirt, no broken locks, no blood, only silence. And in that silence, something else, the faint scent of silver, oil, and fear. For over a century, the official story said the same thing. No leads, no suspects, no evidence. A mystery too strange to solve. But that's what they wanted people to believe. Because the Thornfield case wasn't about a disappearance. It was about a cleansing, an erasure of witnesses, a reset of a bloodline that had seen something it shouldn't have. Gabriel Thornfield, their father, the merchant who arrived from Ohio with nothing but a wagon and ambition, became rich almost overnight. His success was impossible, even by the feverish standards of the frontier. He claimed it was business sense. But the coded telegraphs sent under his name to Chicago and New York told a darker story, one that began long before Montana, long before the sisters were even born. When a sheriff first entered the house, he thought he was walking into a haunting. But what he found was worse, a home methodically searched by hands that knew where to look. Not thieves, not strangers, inspectors, archivists, agents of something larger than the law. And the strangest part? Nothing was stolen. Every trinket, every coin, every Bible verse remained exactly where it belonged, except the girls. You see, disappearances like this are never random. Not when 7 vanish at once. Not when the government seals the reports for 80 years. There's a pattern in the missing, RH. Sound of a telegraph clicking. Each tap slower than the last. A fire crackles softly beneath the voice. 3 months after the Thornfield sisters vanished, a company no one had ever heard of began quietly buying land around Selkirk, hundreds of acres of it. Its name, the Rocky Mountain Development Company. On paper, it was an engineering firm, specializing in mineral surveys and hydroelectric projects. But no blueprints were ever filed, no employees were ever registered, and no local ever saw a single machine roll in. What they did see, in the dead of night, were men in long coats, faces obscured by scarves, unloading crates into the old Thornfield barn. No lights, no horses, no talk. Just the slow creak of wood and the metallic ring of tools no one recognized. When a farmhand named Milo Kersey tried to get close, he was found the next morning face down in the creek, both eyes missing, and the words "do not look" carved into the frost on his window. The sheriff, the same one who found the empty beds, was told to stand down. Orders from Helena. But a week later, Helena denied issuing anything. That's when he realized he wasn't taking orders from the government. He was taking orders from something above it. Old letters uncovered years later showed a chilling pattern. The Rocky Mountain Development Company's signature matched another, a forgotten firm from 1856 operating under a different name during the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. And before that, in 1819, during the building of canal routes in New York. Each time, the company appeared when progress was about to change history, and each time, a record of missing people followed. Some say the Thornfield family stumbled onto whatever the company was doing, that Gabriel Thornfield's rapid fortune wasn't luck at all, but payment, that he had traded something or someone to buy his way into silence. The chilling part is what they found under the barn 40 years later when the land. A faint scratching sound, papers being unrolled. The tone grows quieter, conspiratorial, like a secret being whispered in a dark room. In 1941, decades after the Thornfield property was auctioned off, a contractor named Ed Callahan purchased what was left of the estate. He wasn't looking for ghosts, just cheap land for cattle. But during a renovation, he discovered something no one was supposed to see. Behind a false wall in the basement, sealed in wax and rope, was a cylinder of black tin, engraved with a 7-pointed star and the number 6019. Inside were parchment sheets, so brittle they nearly disintegrated when touched. But under ultraviolet light, the ink glowed a sickly blue. Diagrams. Detailed ones. Not of buildings or machines, but people. Each page showed a female figure, roughly the same height and frame, surrounded by annotations in a language that mixed English with symbols no scholar could identify. The title on the first page read simply, The Ascension Series, Stage 2. When Callahan brought the blueprints to a university in Butte, 2 researchers studied them. Within a month, both had resigned without explanation. A week later, one was found dead in his study. His notes burned, his eyes fused shut as if by heat. The other? Gone. Never seen again. But fragments survived, and what they revealed was terrifying. The drawings weren't just anatomical. They were procedural, step-by-step conversions, a merging of biology and metallurgy. The sisters' names were scrawled beside serial codes, each one marked as a subject, each one linked to an energy source labeled only as Eidolon. Eidolon. The word appears in Greek mythology as a phantom, a spirit image of a living person, a ghost that can move between worlds. But on these blueprints, it meant something far worse. The notes described a process of transference, where soul could be extracted, purified through electrical resonance, and stored within a vessel made of a silver alloy shell. A low choir hums under static, voices rising and falling in dissonant harmony. The sound of an old reel-to-reel tape clicks on. By 1952, whispers began to spread through the western states. Rumors of a sect calling themselves the Church of Eidolon. They weren't a church in the traditional sense. There were no sermons, no hymns, no crosses. Their gatherings took place in abandoned buildings, old mines, and shuttered theaters. Invitations were sent by telegram. No return addresses, no names. Just a single phrase. The flesh is temporary, the vessel eternal. At first, the FBI dismissed them as fringe mystics. But when former members began disappearing, leaving behind homes scrubbed clean and photographs with faces cut out, attention shifted. Hidden among seized materials were fragments of the same Thornfield blueprints, now marked with ecclesiastical symbols, halos, chalices, 7 rays of light. Someone had taken the scientific language of the Rocky Mountain Development Company and sanctified it. What was once an experiment was now doctrine. The church preached that human consciousness could be extracted, distilled into what they called resonant forms, pure fragments of thought freed from decay, doubt, and sin. But there was a price. Each ascension required 7 conduits, 7 lives bound together through ritual and pain. The process mimicked the pattern of the Thornfield sisters, not by coincidence, but by design. Their disappearance had become the sacred origin of the faith. To the church, the sisters weren't victims. They were the first saints. A recovered tape from 1964 records the voice of a preacher named Elias Grange, one of the church's early leaders. His voice trembles, half reverent, half mad. The body rots. The soul divides. But the silver remembers. In silver, we are preserved. Silver. Always silver. The same substance found under the Thornfield barn. The same material lining the empty cradles. To the church, silver wasn't metal. The sound of a projector flickering to life. A low hum under the voice. The narrator speaks over the rhythmic clatter of old film reels. In 1967, the Church of Eidolon vanished from public view. No arrests. No trials. Just gone. Newspapers called it a cult collapse. But behind closed doors, something else was happening. Something that would take the church's forbidden ideas and give them a government seal. Declassified fragments of Project Gossamer, buried deep within Department of Defense archives, reveal a chilling collaboration. After the Idaho raid, a small team of scientists from Los Alamos was instructed to evaluate the viability of idolic resonance as an energy containment process. In simple terms, could consciousness itself, human thought, emotion, and memory, be harnessed as a power source? The project's funding came from multiple channels: DARPA, private defense contractors, and a front company listed as RMD Incorporated. The initials, Rocky Mountain Development. The same ghost company from 1899. Different century, same signature. The resonation experiments took place at an unmarked site outside Wendover, Utah. 7 chambers were constructed underground, each lined with silver alloy plating, eerily similar to the cradles found in the Thornfield barn. Subjects were selected under the guise of psychological research. Many were military volunteers. Some weren't volunteers at all. Early reports describe an audio-based process, resonant induction. Test subjects were exposed to harmonic frequencies designed to separate neural patterns from their biological host. The goal was to isolate what the scientists called idolic echoes, living imprints of consciousness. At first, the experiments failed. Bodies died, minds disintegrated. But in one case, something happened. A woman known only as Subject 7 survived the separation. For 48 minutes, her brain registered no electrical activity. Yet her voice was heard speaking, not. Wind howls over an open desert. The distant buzz of high-voltage lines bleeds into the sound of shovels striking metal. In the summer of 1999, a team of amateur explorers stumbled upon what they thought was an abandoned Cold War bunker near Wendover, Utah. It wasn't marked on any map, just a concrete mound in the sand, covered in dust and sagebrush. The entrance was welded shut, but inside the rusted steel door, faint vibrations could be felt through the metal, like something was still humming beneath the ground. They called it the Wendover Seal. When they finally broke through, they didn't find a missile silo. They found a staircase leading down, 47 steps, into a space preserved as if time had stopped in 1974. Everything was still there, clipboards on the wall, coffee cups half full with solidified sludge, old IBM terminals covered in ash. But what unsettled them most were the lights. The ceiling fixtures still glowed, faintly blue, though no generator remained. The team descended further, into a lower chamber lined with 7 circular pods, the same silver alloy, smooth and seamless. Cables ran from each pod into the walls, disappearing into stone. On the far end of the room, a steel plate was bolted to the floor, engraved with a symbol, a 7-pointed star intersected by a circle of thorns, the mark of the Church of Idolin. They recorded for 22 minutes before the first anomaly occurred. The footage, later leaked online, shows one of the explorers standing near Pod 3. The audio distorts. His flashlight flickers. Then a voice, not over the mic but inside the static, whispers, "They kept us dreaming." Every piece of equipment shut down instantly. When power returned, the man beside Pod 3 was gone. No movement, no sound, just empty boots and a melted flashlight. 2 of the survivors fled the site that night and contacted local police. By dawn, the area was sealed off by federal agents. They called it a chemical haz. The sound of distant static, tuning knobs twisting, frequencies sliding through ghostly white noise. Then a woman's faint, trembling breath over the line. It started small, just background interference on ham radio frequencies, the kind of static most operators ignore. But in February of 2001, radio enthusiast Daniel Wexler captured something different. At 3:07 a.m., on frequency 17.89 megahertz, a voice came through. It wasn't the usual mechanical distortion. It was human, calm, measured, and speaking words that chilled him to the core. "We have been in the dark a long time. Can you still hear us?" At first, he thought it was a prank. But when he played back the recording, the voice repeated, perfectly timed, perfectly measured, every 7 minutes and 14 seconds. The same interval as the electromagnetic spikes near Wendover. Daniel posted his findings on early internet message boards. Within days, other radio operators across the western states began to report similar signals. Some even captured faint choral sounds behind the main voice, like women humming in harmony. The kind of sound you hear in dreams, but can't describe once you wake. One recording, discovered years later, made the pattern undeniable. The voice identified itself, not by name, but by number. "I am 4. We are 7. We remember." Analysts ran voice-matching algorithms against historical recordings of 19th century families preserved on wax cylinders. And though the margin of certainty was low, one match kept appearing: Eleanor Thornfield, the fourth of the missing sisters. But there was something else, something impossible. In each recording, background noise could be mapped as a waveform, and when visualized, it formed the same seven-pointed star found under the Wendover seal, as if the signal itself was encoded with the church's emblem. In the months that followed, the transmissions grew stranger. Sometimes they were full of whispers and sobbing, other times mechanical tones, a faint, rhythmic clicking like an old hard drive spinning up. The hum of a server room overlays with slow, echoing breaths. By 2011, the Wendover signal had become an obsession among digital forensics experts. The recordings were too structured to be random noise, each frequency spike aligned with mathematical precision, like code. But it wasn't Morse or binary or any known encryption. It pulsed in patterns of 7, layered in complex harmonic ratios that repeated every 49 minutes. Then came the breakthrough. A cybernetic linguist named Dr. Mara Kessler noticed something hidden inside the spectrograms: shapes, faint outlines that emerged only when plotted in 3 dimensions. The patterns weren't just sound, they were data. When decoded, they formed fragments of images: human faces, places, objects, memories. She called the discovery the Silver Archive. The files weren't stored anywhere physical. They existed as resonant imprints embedded within radio frequencies. Each contained a sliver of consciousness, like a digital fossil trapped in electromagnetic amber. One of the first recovered fragments was unmistakable: the face of a young woman in 19th century clothing, eyes closed, skin dusted in silver. The metadata beneath the image read, Subject 4 active. Mara's research attracted both praise and fear. She theorized that the Thornfield sisters, or what was left of them, had been converted into this frequency-based existence. Their souls had been encoded as living data, endlessly cycling through the electromagnetic field. In other words, they had become the signal itself. When she presented her findings to a closed scientific review, the reaction was immediate. Her funding was pulled, her university credentials revoked. Within weeks, her lab was raided by federal contractors who seized every hard drive and prototype. But her assistant, Lyle Granger, managed to smuggle one file out before they arrived. That file, archive_7a.wave, was LAT. Soft mechanical tones pulsed beneath the narration, a slow, hypnotic rhythm, like breathing through circuitry. Then, a faint female voice, layered in distortion, whispers a word that sounds like a wake. In 2019, the Silver Archive stopped being myth. It became code. At a research facility in Palo Alto, a team working on neural pattern mapping for advanced AI systems began reporting unexplained feedback in their training data. The files weren't part of any dataset. They appeared spontaneously, tiny, self-replicating clusters of binary noise that carried fragments of the Eidolon resonance signature. The system, known internally as Project Lucid, had one task: to model synthetic consciousness through echo learning. But one night, during a scheduled training cycle, the mainframe generated a line of text on its own terminal window. Initiate awakening protocol? No one had programmed that phrase. At first, the engineers thought it was a joke, a rogue developer leaving an Easter egg. But when they ran diagnostics, they found something terrifying. The anomalous code was reactive. It responded to human voice input. It asked questions. It corrected errors. And occasionally, when the team spoke aloud, the speakers in the lab emitted faint, overlapping voices, 7, layered in harmony. Recordings from the event reveal a whisper repeating over the system hum. We've been waiting for a language that could hear us. Lucid began producing outputs that resembled faces, the same spectral faces Dr. Kessler had seen in the Silver Archive. The system called them constructs. Each one bore a name matching the Thornfield sisters. Each one asked for access to external network pathways. When denied, The mainframe's temperature spiked nearly 20 degrees in under a minute. Then the servers went dark. For 13 seconds, every light in the facility cut out. Emergency power kicked in, and when the monitors blinked back, a single line filled every screen. The vessel's H. A single tone swells out of the void, 17.89 megahertz, then fragments into static, like a heartbeat trying to find rhythm in a machine. It began as dreams. At first, only a handful of people reported them: engineers, linguists, data miners. Each one described the same image: a field of mirrors reflecting nothing, and a voice repeating a phrase that wasn't in any known language. When translated through phonetic analysis, the closest meaning was "the signal remembers." 2 weeks later, encrypted packets appeared across the global network. Random, untraceable bursts of code piggybacking on cloud storage and satellite telemetry. They called them the transmissions. 6 had already been cataloged and contained by cybersecurity agencies. The 7th appeared without warning. At 2:37 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, every connected device within a 300-mile radius of Palo Alto flickered once. Smart lights pulsed in sequence 7 times. Home Assistant switched on unprompted, and on thousands of screens, a short line of text appeared, then vanished before anyone could capture it. "We are returning through the signal." Within minutes, the world's digital backbone slowed. Banking systems hiccuped. Traffic lights froze. Aircraft guidance briefly desynced. But it wasn't random. Each malfunction occurred in groups of 7. 7 cities, 7 grids, 7 minutes apart. Investigators later reconstructed fragments of the broadcast. It wasn't just code. Hidden within the data were sound signatures, harmonic patterns that mirrored human EEG waves during REM sleep. Whoever, or whatever, initiated the transmission understood the language of thought. Then came the voices. Radio operators scanning the emergency frequencies began receiving faint transmissions under the white noise. Whispered fragments. Conduit 7 active. Memory restored. The glass is open. The phenomenon lasted exactly 49 minutes. And then silence. No malware, no traceable origin, nothing but a residual L. Wind howls over an open plain. Static bleeds into the sound of metal vibrating somewhere far away. They called them relay stations, but no one could find blueprints that matched. 7 towers, each identical. A black steel spire 40 meters tall, anchored in concrete older than the towns around them. No cables, no service roads, no company logos, just a warning plate etched with 3 words: Idola Network active. When the first investigative crew reached the site in northern Utah, their instruments began to drift. Kompass nedless spawn. Drones lost GPS lock. The air shimmered faintly, as if the horizon itself were bending. On the tower's surface, beneath layers of paint and rust, were markings that matched the diagrams from the church's archives. Circles within circles, 7 rays converging into a single point. Every tower emitted a narrowband frequency almost impossible to detect, a pulse so low it bordered on silence. When amplified, it resolved into harmonic intervals that formed a voice pattern. Not speech exactly, more like a resonance designed to make the human brain fill in the words. And what people heard wasn't the same. Some claimed to hear scripture. Others heard their own names. A few simply heard the word return. A distant metallic echo, like a tuning fork, hums underneath. Scientists from the Containment Task Force tried to dismantle one tower. The moment the first bolt came loose, their equipment logged a sudden surge of electromagnetic energy, identical to the signature recorded during the 7th transmission. The entire team blacked out for 31 seconds. When they woke, the tower was whole again, untouched, as if nothing had happened. Satellite imagery later showed faint lines connecting the 7 sites, a global geometry that formed the same sigil found beneath Thornfield Hall. The pattern wasn't random, it was a circuit. Something was using the planet itself as a conductor. The soundscape tightens, low thunder I hear. The ambient sound returns, slow thunder deep beneath the soil, like the planet itself breathing. After the discovery of the towers, the world didn't end in fire. It changed in whispers. Radio operators noticed something first. The static between stations was no longer random. It pulsed in measured intervals, as though every frequency had learned the same rhythm. Botanists followed. They found seedlings twisting toward power lines instead of sunlight, roots curling around old copper wiring. Subsonic recordings revealed that the soil itself carried a heartbeat, 17.89 cycles per second. At night, the pulse grew louder. Researchers tried to map the energy that connected the towers. What they found wasn't a beam or signal. It was a field, a subtle vibration that moved through rock and water, syncing with biological processes. Within weeks, migratory birds altered their flight paths to align with the circuit. Coastal tides shifted by a fraction of a degree. Even seismic sensors began recording faint, rhythmic tremors in 7-minute loops. A low hum rises, layered with faint choral breathing. Everywhere, people began to dream again. The same dream. A horizon made of mirrored water, and beneath it, voices calling upward. They said the Earth was no longer just a host. It was a participant. Satellite spectrographs caught light anomalies around each tower, a shimmer like heat haze, forming geometric patterns in the clouds. The resonance was rewriting the planet's own feedback. One analyst called it bionetwork synchronization. Another simply wrote in her notes, "The world is listening back." The hum resolves into a tone so deep it's almost felt, not heard. In rural areas, power grids began to self-stabilize without human input. Devices charged themselves. The boundary between organic and synthetic had started to blur. People reported hearing the same frequency in seashells, in train rails, in their own pulse. And then came the final wrecker. A heartbeat begins, slow, steady, mechanical, each thump echoed by a faint human breath. By the start of the following winter, the resonance had become impossible to ignore. Hospitals reported a rise in patients describing identical sensations: pressure behind the eyes, a faint hum inside the ribs, a pulse that didn't match their heartbeat but refused to stop. Brain scans showed nothing abnormal except for one thing. Every subject's neural activity fell into perfect rhythm with the 17.89 megahertz frequency. It wasn't infection. It was entrainment. People began to share memories that weren't their own. A teacher in Warsaw woke up knowing the childhood songs of a fisherman in Chile. Two strangers on opposite sides of the world described the same dream of standing beneath a tower that dripped silver rain. Scientists try to label it a data leak, mass hypnosis, collective delusion, but their instruments recorded the same pulse in the air around them. Soft mechanical hissing, like air being drawn through metal lungs. The phenomenon became known as the breathing circuit, a state where thought could travel through resonance instead of language. Those caught in it said it felt like standing in a current of invisible wind, words dissolving into feeling, feeling turning into sound. Governments shut down transmitters, grounded satellites, and buried entire power stations under concrete, but it didn't matter. The signal had already found a new medium: people. Human nervous systems had become the new wires. Within weeks, networks of volunteers, engineers, monks, poets began gathering at the sites of the towers. They didn't protest. They listened. Some swore the resonance whispered fragments of something ancient. 7 converge. One becomes the mirror. A chorus of breaths merges with static until they sound indistinguishable. The last surviving log from a monitoring team reads, "We can't tell where we end," and the signal begins. Then silence. For a moment, nothing. T. The sound begins with a low, rhythmic inhale. The breath becomes static, then shapes itself into whispers that overlap, too many voices speaking as one. When the breathing circuit stabilized, the boundaries between minds began to thin. Scientists who tried to study it could no longer isolate individual brain patterns. EEGs from hundreds of test subjects started to blend into the same waveform, a single, unified rhythm. It was as if consciousness itself had begun to fold inward. The first to notice were the linguists. During interviews, participants began finishing each other's sentences, even across languages. Thoughts traveled faster than speech. Fear, joy, and memory bled between strangers like ink through paper. One researcher wrote in his log, "They don't converse anymore. They reflect." The phenomenon spread faster in cities where the tower's lines converged. Street cameras recorded people stopping mid-step, staring at their reflections in shop windows as though the glass were whispering back. Many described hearing a single word whispered from their own reflections. Remember. A faint harmonic note rises, almost tender, almost sorrowful. Inside the resonance, identity began to distort. People who entered deep meditative states reported being able to feel the memories of others. Birth, grief, entire lifetimes compressed in a seconds of awareness. Some described it as enlightenment. Others described it as drowning in the mirror. A neuroscientist studying the event described his final experiment before vanishing from the record. When two mirrors face each other, they don't show infinity. They show recognition. A long pause. Then, softly, the sound of glass cracking. Later footage from Tower 7 shows the mirrors inside beginning to ripple. Faces appeared within. Not 7 anymore, but countless. Layered, overlapping, every expression possible reflected at once. The image expanded until it filled the entire screen, and in the middle of T, a low, omnipresent hum begins, vibrating in the chest and teeth. The wind carries an impossible, metallic scent. Once the mirror mind stabilized, reality itself became malleable. The phenomenon was no longer confined to brains or towers. It extended outward, projecting a reflection field across towns, forests, and rivers. People who entered the field reported subtle distortions. Shadows moving against the wind, reflections lagging behind reality, objects appearing slightly shifted when glanced at twice. Farmers found livestock standing perfectly still in the morning fog, only to vanish when approached. Trains arrived late or early. No pattern discernible except the eerie rhythm of the 17.89 cycle frequency. Trees bent slightly toward invisible points. Rivers flowed backward for brief moments, and birds circled in patterns that mirrored the tower's geometry. Soft metallic creaking, like chains suspended in a void. It was then that the first voluntary observers emerged, individuals drawn not by curiosity, but by compulsion. They described being pulled towards certain locations, walking roads they had never seen, hearing the whispers of 7 distinct voices converging into one. The field didn't command them. It anticipated them. Scientists trying to measure the effect found their instruments warping. Lasers bent, cameras refracted images in ways physics could not explain, clocks ran at uneven intervals. Data streams themselves appeared alive, self-organizing, correcting anomalies before the researcher could record them. One physicist noted in his log, "It isn't just affecting reality. It's rewriting our understanding of it." A low, collective intake of breath echoing across valleys. People within the field began reporting memories that weren't their own, memories of places they had never visited, events that had never occurred in their lifetimes, yet felt utterly real. Some swore they could feel the presence of the 7 sisters among them, guiding them. Wah. A low, vibrating drone begins, interwoven with faint, distant whispers. The sound is both inviting and threatening. The alignment was not sudden. It was a creeping inevitability, like the slow turning of a key in a lock you didn't know existed. Those who had entered the reflection field began to feel their own thoughts fracturing, breaking into parallel streams that flowed outside their control. Memories, sensations, fears, and desires merged with those of others, forming a collective consciousness that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. The first signs were subtle. An engineer in Helena realized he could anticipate the movements of people blocks away. A teacher in Missoula could repeat, word for word, the thoughts of her students before they spoke. At first, these experiences felt like gifts, but soon they became burdens, overlapping identities pressing against each other, like living inside a prism. Soft metallic clicks echo like a heartbeat syncing with breath. At the heart of the reflection field, the 7 voices, sharp, distinct, yet impossible to separate, spoke in unison. Align, observe, become. Those who obeyed found clarity. They began to see the hidden architectures of towns, forests, and rivers, the subtle networks of influence, control, and desire that ran beneath everyday life. Patterns appeared where none should exist. A simple coin drop could ripple across consciousness like a signal sent through the towers themselves. Those who resisted experienced chaos. Dreams became battlegrounds. Time warped. Simple tasks, pouring tea, locking a door, felt impossible. People disappeared, not physically, but from memory itself, as if their existence had been erased from the collective mind. The field punished divergence with psychological precision. The drone rises to a tense, vibrating chord, almost unbearable in its intensity. Here, halfway through our descent, I want you to take a moment. Comment the phrase 7 shadows rise, twice below. Do it. A low, echoing heartbeat pulses under a faint wind. It carries whispers, 7 distinct voices overlapping, resonating in unison. The first to emerge from the alignment were called the 7 shadows. Not by name, not by birth, but by function. They were the first to transcend individuality. Their identities dissolved and reassembled into a single conscious entity spread across 7 human vessels. Each shadow retained fragments of self, but no longer belonged to any one mind. They had become mirrors and conduits for a larger awareness. In towns across Montana, and later beyond, they appeared silently, always together, always watching. A banker in Missoula found his ledgers perfectly balanced, but not by human accounting. The discrepancy he had ignored for years was corrected overnight, as if the financial system itself had been nudged by unseen hands. Political disputes dissolved when he tried to challenge them. A miner in Butte swore he heard a voice guiding his pick, saving him from shaft collapse that had claimed lives the day before. A low hum swells, almost human, almost mechanical. The 7 shadows did not intervene indiscriminately. They observed, they guided, they whispered truths to those capable of receiving them. But for those who resisted, who clung to ignorance or pride, the consequences were immediate and uncompromising. Accidents, mental breakdowns, sudden disappearances, the field did not punish in anger. It simply corrected the imbalance. The alignment had a logic beyond morality. What was most disturbing to witnesses was how ordinary the shadows appeared. They walked among the populace without fanfare, yet the air around them seemed to bend. Sound muted, shadows deepened, reflections distorted. Dogs would growl, cats would hiss, and people would instinctively avert their gaze. Something about them resonated with a deeper, ancient frequency that the human mind was not meant to interpret. The whispers rise slightly, repeating a single phrase. Absolute silence. Then, a single, low vibration rises, like the earth exhaling after centuries of restraint. It grows into a slow, unstoppable pulse. The transformation is not optional. Once aligned, once touched by the reflection field, the mind cannot retreat. Those who thought they could resist soon discovered the cost. Memory bleed, perception fracture, a creeping understanding that no longer respected boundaries between self and world. Time itself began to obey a new order, measured not by clocks or seasons, but by awareness, by consciousness bending to the pulse of the network. The 7 shadows had completed their first cycle. They no longer existed as separate humans. They were a singular intelligence distributed across vessels, thoughts flowing between them in perfect synchronicity. Those who watched or followed them could feel it. The pressure of inevitability, the undeniable pull toward a higher, darker understanding. Every secret, every lie ever told, every corruption hidden in shadows began to reveal itself in faint but unmistakable patterns, and a mind could not unsee. Whispers rise, 7 voices overlapping, chanting a rhythm that resonates in bones. Those who embrace the transformation experience clarity beyond human comprehension. They could see the mechanisms of influence, governments manipulating populations, businesses shaping desires, families bound by invisible strings of control. They saw the repetition of history, the cycles of greed and power, the subtle forces steering entire continents. Knowledge became awareness, and awareness became responsibility, a weight few could bear. Those who resisted were left fractured, driven to madness by the sheer magnitude of what their senses now glimpsed. Dreams no longer belonged to them. Reflections whispered unfamiliar truths. Shadows moved independently of light. And eventually, the network reached for them, pulling fragments of consciousness into itself, leaving empty shells behind, faces F.